This season, it's hard to find a team that needs to prove it more than the Los Angeles Chargers. They're entering this new era with Jim Harbaugh as the head coach and some pretty big roster changes. More importantly though, the Justin Herbert scrutiny won't end until he has some serious success in the playoffs, and the Chargers have to figure out how to get into the playoffs in the first place before they can even try to think about winning a playoff game. But how do they do that? Well, it all starts with Justin Herbert. It has to. And I'll tell you what, Justin Herbert is a first ballot Hall of Famer when it comes to hypotheticals. He's proven that he's a good NFL quarterback, but the discourse around him is hilarious. But it makes sense. Herbert is super talented. That's been made pretty clear, but he hasn't won anything yet. And a lot of the criticism comes back to his first and only playoff game of his career against the Jaguars. The Chargers, simply put, should have won that game. They blew a 27-0 lead, the third largest blown lead in NFL history. That alone can start a narrative for sure, but when you look at his play, Herbert has been good. Last season he did have a career low, only 20 touchdowns, but he only threw 7 picks and missed 4 games after he broke his finger. But we have seen some pretty good seasons from Herbert. He was great in 2020 with 31 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and followed it up with an even bigger passing season, 38 touchdowns and 15 interceptions in 2021. But he hasn't broke 25 passing touchdowns since then. Justin Herbert is a quarterback that I'm personally very high on, but like I said before, he still hasn't won anything. And because of that, he's going to nonstop get criticism from outside sources. Now, I've personally watched enough of Herbert to come to my own conclusions and think that he's a very good quarterback despite the lack of playoff success, but other people don't seem to be in the same boat, which makes sense. You know, the best of the best to ever do it have gone on to win in the playoffs plenty. And I do think that Herbert's capable. Justin Herbert is just a very interesting player to look at because when you look at just how incompetent the Chargers have been over the past couple years, especially since he's been drafted, really none of that is on Justin Herbert. Like, I know that sounds like a cop-out for him and just giving him excuses, but if you actually watch the Chargers, you know that Justin Herbert hasn't been the problem. It's really been a bunch of other things. And because of that, I do think if the Chargers can just surround him with the right pieces and continue to build around him, Herbert can have a lot of success with the Chargers. And luckily, I do think Harbaugh is the right guy for that job. A lot of the backpedaling with Herbert does come back to the weapons around him, which they weren't absolutely terrible like people made it out to be. Keenan Allen was a long-time staple for the Chargers at wide receiver. He's been banged up and missed time for sure, but he was great playing alongside Herbert and even had 1,200 yards last year while only playing in 13 games. He's also pretty much had 3 1,000-yard seasons playing with Herbert. His worst year was in 2022 when the 1-2 became Mike Williams and Josh Palmer. Williams admittedly didn't end up being quite as good as he was expected to be coming out of college, but he did end up with an 1,100-yard season during Herbert's second season and had 900 yards in 2022. He's still a very good wide receiver in my opinion, but last season he tore his ACL and now he's with the Jets. Those are 2 pretty big losses, with the Chargers trading away Keenan Allen to the Bears. The wide receiver weapons that Herbert has had over his career really weren't that bad. They really just struggled to stay healthy at times. And the really important returner for this season is definitely Josh Palmer. He's been solid playing with Herbert and averaged over 500 yards a season. And now he might legitimately be the number 1. Although it's pretty obvious that everyone would certainly like to see a bit more from Quentin Johnston if that's at all possible. The 21st overall pick a year ago, and he already looks like a bust in every way. Now, it's still early, but he had 430 yards last season, and he just did not pass the eye test. He's just got to do more, and according to the Chargers depth chart, he isn't even listed as a top 3 guy. It's likely going to be Palmer, veteran DJ Chark, who's now on his 4th team in 4 years, but has been solid with all 3 at times, and then there's the name to watch, Ladd McConkey, a 2-time national champ at Georgia, and he ended up going early, 34th overall to LA. He's a pretty interesting pick because he really wasn't super productive in college. He had 1 year with over 500 yards, 762 in 2022, but the tape on him just shows the potential to be a really good pro. I mean, it's not like it's impossible to see a guy who really wasn't that crazy good of a college player then all of a sudden turn around and be a stud in the NFL. I feel like guys like DK Metcalf and Terry McLaurin are good examples there. Now, I do think the Chargers wide receiver room did get worse with the departure of both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, but I also think that there's a lot of potential in the wide receiver room. It's a lot of unproven potential, but potential nonetheless. No, Josh Palmer is not a flashy wide receiver 1. If anything, it's not a great wide receiver 1, but he has shown potential to be a good NFL wide receiver, and even if he is the number 1 wide receiver this year, maybe it'll get better next year by picking someone up. More importantly though, Ladd McConkey succeeding this year would be really cool to see. I know he has a lot of high expectations and he's been a bit quiet during the preseason, so it would be pretty cool to see him actually be a factor in this offense this upcoming season. Of course, like I said before, Quentin Johnston is a guy that's looking for a bounce back year. It's really early in his career. It's hard to really definitively call him a bust right now, but he is trending in that direction, so he needs a good year this year to kind of turn things around for himself. Now, I'm sure a lot of fans were really excited to see what the Chargers were going to get out of Brendan Rice, and from what it sounds like, he's just not there yet, and that's okay. He's a guy that really didn't go high for a reason, but because of his name, he's going to have expectations. So maybe down the line, there might be something with him, but I don't think so. But regardless, I do think that the wide receiver core is a weak point on this team. Obviously, they have one of the weaker receiving units in the league. It's definitely not the worst. I mean, I'd take what they have over the Patriots, but a weaker wide receiver core theoretically is going to slow down the offense. But the Chargers have done some things to try to prevent that. It'll be pretty interesting to see what the Chargers look like after losing two good receivers, but they're also losing their top running back for the past while too. Austin Eckler is no longer a Charger, and he's now in Washington. He has been a legitimate touchdown machine for the Chargers. He had 25 touchdowns over 2021 and 2022, but last year he slowed down a bit, and now he's a Commander. The Chargers, to fill that hole, essentially just signed the Ravens backfield. Both Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins are now in Los Angeles, and you could just tell that connection with the Harbaugh brothers, it's pretty clear and obvious there. Now, that's not all. They also drafted Kamani Vidal out of Troy in the 6th round. Now, as for the offensive line that they're behind, it should theoretically be solid. They took Joe Alt 5th overall and made it clear that the offensive line was a major priority. He'll be opposite of Rashawn Slater, and that should at the very least be a good tackle duo there. And LA also signed Bradley Bozeman. Then obviously there's Zion Johnson and Trey Pipkins there at guard. When you look at this line, it has the potential to actually be decent. That's really what Justin Herbert needs. It's really what this whole offense needs. If the line can be good, maybe the Chargers will figure it out faster than people think they will. I loved watching Austin Eckler for the Chargers for so long. This guy was just really fun to watch. He's an incredible receiving back. He just felt like he was shifty. He was just great. He was a touchdown machine, like I said, and it's pretty cool seeing him with the Commanders now. I'm not a diehard Commanders fan like Jackson is, but the closest NFL stadium to me is the Commanders, so I'm inevitably going to get to see him play now, which is just really cool. But now that he's gone, I do like what the Chargers did in bringing in J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Obviously, those guys are going to have immediate chemistry. They were together in Baltimore. Not that that matters too much, but these are both guys with potential. Obviously, Gus Edwards has had the opportunity to show it a bit more. J.K. Dobbins is really looking for a second chance here in Los Angeles. This is a guy that had high expectations coming into the league and has just not been able to stay on the field. This guy has been injury riddled and has had season-ending injuries in back-to-back seasons now. If he can stay healthy, I do like J.K. Dobbins, but that's a big if at this point in his career. As for Gus Edwards, he's probably going to be a starting back, and he's just proven to be a good running back in the NFL. He's coming off of 810 yards and 13 touchdowns in Baltimore. Like, they aren't the best backs in the world, but they brought in two guys that they thought were capable. I obviously do think that Edwards is capable. It's going to be interesting to see if J.K. Dobbins can remain healthy, and if not, maybe we'll see a little bit of a dull. But regardless of who the running backs are, the improved offensive line should no doubt help them. This Chargers offensive line is without a doubt better than it was, but it's still a bit unproven. Like, don't get me wrong, theoretically on paper, this line should be good, but Joe Alt, regardless of what you might want to think, is still a rookie, and anything can really happen once we get into the regular season. Everything that he's done up until now has showed us that he's going to be a stud in the NFL, and that's why he went so high at the NFL draft. So I do think everything's going to work out there, and because of that, I do like the tackle duo. Rashawn Slater is also a stud. The Chargers have definitely felt confident in him at tackle. He's gone one-on-one with some of the best pass rushers and been able to hold his own for the most part. But now on both sides of that line, theoretically, you should be shored up at the tackle position. Obviously, there are still some question marks on that offensive line, like how good is the interior of the line going to be? But regardless, adding Bradley Bozeman no doubt helps, who is also, funny enough, a former Raven. Clearly, Jim is a fan of his brother's players. And as of now, it seems like the hope from the Chargers is because they improved that offensive line, that Justin Herbert is going to be able to kind of uplift the weaker wide receiver talent, which I will say makes sense. offense. Patrick Mahomes has done it in Kansas City, and Tom Brady literally made a career of lifting up mediocre white guys into the good wide receiver category. I really don't know how Chris Hogan was a thing, and the Chargers seem to think that Herbert is in that same category, and I can see it, but even with the Chargers offensive line being better and Herbert being good, there are still a lot of other question marks on this team. One of the biggest questions for the Chargers is really just, what are the expectations for this season? What's considered a good season here? Because it is year one under a new head coach, Jim Harbaugh. He's fresh off of winning a national championship at Michigan, and whether or not he did cheat, I mean, he did, it really doesn't matter because he's back in the NFL now, years after taking the 49ers to the Super Bowl with Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick. He's getting another shot in the pros, which is going to just be really cool to watch. And lucky for him, he gets to inherit a franchise quarterback who's already on an extension in Justin Herbert. Now he just needs to build the rest of the team around him, and the Chargers are set. But that's easier said than done. DraftKings has the Chargers line at 8.5 wins, so they're kind of right there at 500, which does make sense. I mean, this is a solid team. Unfortunately, though, they're not proven enough, and the defense doesn't exactly help their case. The front seven isn't great, and the secondary is just a monstrosity. If it's a long year for the Chargers, that's probably why, but that's what they brought Jim Harbaugh in to fix. The Chargers definitely aren't dethroning the Chiefs anytime soon, probably, but the Raiders and Broncos aren't exactly juggernauts. Jim Harbaugh is a great hire for this team. Even if he was just hired because he was running away from his punishment from his time in Michigan, it's still a good signing. This is a guy who coached in the NFL before and even took his team to the Super Bowl, then went into college football, won the national championship there, and now is back in the pros. He's a proven head coach, and the Chargers were really in need of somebody to come in and really just fix this dumpster fire. So now the Chargers are in a new era, and I personally hope that Harbaugh can turn this team around. My roommate is new to watching the NFL, and he had to pick an NFL team to support, so he went ahead and picked the Chargers without really doing any research, and I don't have the heart to tell him that this is one of the most disappointing teams in the NFL. So for his sake, please let them be good. Justin Herbert doesn't have better weapons this year, but he will have plenty of more time to throw the ball. And regardless of all the other problems that this team has, if Justin Herbert can succeed with this offense, this team is going to win games. The Chargers have somehow become the kings of high expectations and constantly falling short. So hopefully Harbaugh can crack the code and help turn around this team and maybe win a playoff game for the first time since 2019.